Felt like I was living the American dream, and then realized that my salary could never put a roof over my head.
To meet population increase.
To rent a room near her school.
Let's be honest, young people can't afford especially like a decent place to live. But it's not all bad news, as some people in communities across the country are taking a stand. That includes one inspiring young lady who's putting the residents of Jersey City above herself.
My name is Bustamante, and I've been housing insecure for 3 months. I have a task in life, and that's to give back to the community. I started volunteering a lot in the homeless shelters, paying attention to local politics, and that's kind of where my roots in Jersey City started to deepen.
Laura works for the Jersey City Council and is helping develop policies meant to address the growing housing insecurity crisis. But Laura herself can't afford rent in her city. She's already $11,000 in debt, having to borrow money to secure housing for herself through college. We interviewed Laura at her girlfriend's apartment, which is already shared with another roommate, and that's where Laura will be until she can find an affordable option of her own.
It doesn't seem like housing is an obtainable thing in the near future for me, and that's very scary. Maybe I guess the right word would be I feel like I'm kind of floating, and I feel sometimes just hopeless. There's really nowhere for me to settle. I don't have my room of my own. I would not be able to afford a medical emergency. It would kind of just be another black hole. My only solution would be another black hole.
Hello, everyone. David Ushery once again updating you on what can only be described as a very dangerous and volatile situation right now in the southern part of Jersey City.
Jersey City recently really experienced a hate crime. I wouldn't be doing the work that I'm doing now, despite of the insecurity that I have. Morally and ethically, I would never be able to connect to my community when tragedy strikes. That opportunity just amplifies my voice, as opposed to only securing myself an affordable housing unit and then just staying quiet. That's just not who I am.
Hi. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. At City Hall, Laura has organized a grassroots door-knocking campaign to learn how many locals are struggling with their housing. While walking around town in freezing temperatures, I was shocked to learn how many landlords were not addressing hot water issues, were failing to follow fire code regulations, and were hiking rents in buildings that are supposed to be rent-controlled, occasionally forcing people out on the streets. How many people do you think, in your community, don't know their housing rights?
Yeah, I would say probably more than half of the people that we spoke to didn't know that they were rent-controlled or living in a rent-controlled building.
That would make me so upset.
Yeah, it's really sad, yeah.
That's crazy.
I know.
And you think it's just the landlords, is that kind of what it's
Yeah,
coming
I think
from?
it's a combination of landlords taking advantage of the city not being on top of this and not enforcing rent control. Maybe even the landlord didn't know that this building was rent controlled and they were just trying to, make more profit off of the property that they're renting out. So we're working right now on some legislation drafts to fix all of those loopholes. We're very fortunate in our community to have community leaders who are committed to fighting for these housing rights and who are willing to work with us here in the government. We really rely on our community leaders who are specialists in this field.
So one of the community leaders who actually introduced me to Laura is Emmy Teeterington. She's an expert on the national housing insecurity and a professor of social work. And I was lucky enough to meet with Emmy at her house to talk about the larger scope of this issue.
They're beautiful photos.
Yeah, it's a cool piece of history.
Yeah.
I think Laura, through her lived experience, has greater awareness of the urgency of this issue, a lot more so than some of our elected officials. We would be better off if we had more people with the lived experience of housing insecurity in decision-making capacities. My story actually doesn't come from my professional experiences. It comes from my personal life. I was running across the Williamsburg Bridge on my way home from work and came across a guy who was up on the railing of the bridge. And I thought he was like a tourist taking pictures or something. And then as I got closer, I realized that was not what was happening. Looked like he was gonna jump. So I stopped and talked with him and convinced him to walk with me and go sit and talk about it at a coffee shop at the bottom of the bridge. And we've been friends ever since, which is almost 10 years now. He was experiencing homelessness and some mental health issues at that time, was kind of at his wit's end. We've been trying to get him into some permanent housing, and he's just been jumping from the shelter to the hospital to the shelter to the street, and kind of this rotating door. That case, that situation, kind of illustrates to me, like puts a fine point on the fact of how broken our system is. And if you know, through my connections and my knowledge of the system, if I can't get him into permanent housing, you know, at the time that he needs it, in the way that he needs it, like something is seriously wrong. It shouldn't be this hard.
Yeah. Why is it that hard?
Well, you could guess that, you know, if we made it easier for people, then we would have to create more housing assistance, right? And people don't want to pay for free housing for people, despite the fact that that is cheaper than the alternative, which is not paying for housing. If you are paying for emergency psychiatric services, police, you know, other kinds of interventions, these things add up cost-wise. It's actually cheaper to give people a housing voucher that houses them permanently than to keep paying for all the supplementary services that come with homelessness and housing insecurity. It actually hasn't been this way for decades and decades, that it actually started in the 80s. We'd see an uptick in street homelessness, the visible street homelessness that you see. That was from failed housing policies and the recession happening then. So to me, that kind of gives me hope that things can change, and that it's about making smart policy decisions and putting the right resources in the right buckets.
That's a really interesting point, because I do think a lot of these issues that we've been talking about, it's very easy to be like, oh, well, it's just kind of like what it is. Like, you know, it's America.
Yeah.
And no, it doesn't have to be like that.
It absolutely does not have to be like this.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be like this. It makes me really excited and hopeful to realize that there are people out there who understand that we do not have to accept certain failures as an intrinsic part of American culture. There are local governments that can make housing affordable and regulate landlord manipulation, which is often much cheaper than the alternative, which is to let people freeze in the street and starve. Let's kind of do better as a whole.
So if you as a viewer feel like your community could do with a lot more affordable housing opportunities, really encourage you to find as many people as you can and get to your city council meeting.
If you go to city council meetings, you'd be surprised of how few people are actually in the room talking about these decisions and appealing to policymakers. And squeaky wheels get the grease, right? So if you're showing up and you are being squeaky about a particular issue, your voice is heard.
I know that there are viewers out there that have it far worse and are struggling with a lot more. I just want everybody to know that I'm committed to fighting the good fight for affordable housing. If you're living a particular situation, it is very likely that the person next to you is also going through similar instability. We're here to help each other, not climb on top of each other. Hopefully this kind of work and this community movement reaches other corners of New Jersey and hopefully country. Sincerely, Laura.